From not signing Brendan Loughnane despite him winning the contender fight, to letting Francis Ngannou walk away, here are the biggest mistakes of Dana White's career. And while Brendan may no longer be remembered as that guy who was rejected, I don't think Dana's gonna forget it anytime soon, especially not after seeing how successful the fighter has been. Brendan fought and won the UFC contender fight in Las Vegas back in 2019, and he emerged successful with a very dominant win over Bill Algeo. Everyone thought that the next obvious step was for him to join the UFC, but that's not what happened. White denied him a contract. According to the UFC president, Brendan just wasn't killer enough for his MMA organization, whatever that means. He believed that Loughnane wasn't actively looking for a finish in that fight, and that's not the UFC standard. Now, how he came to that conclusion remains a mystery to everyone else because the audience was clearly rooting for Brendan, and for a good reason. They saw what Dana failed to see. Brendan had a lot of potential from the get-go, and he's proven that with his career in the PFL, UFC's ultimate competitor. He entered the 2021 playoffs as the #1 seed in his division and was on a 7-fight win streak back then. And it's gotten better for this star. He wasn't able to make it to the championship in 2021, but he came back stronger the next year. In 2022, Brendan was crowned the PFL World Championship winner, bagging $1 million. Can someone who's not killer enough do that, Dana? His championship win has solidified Loughnane as one of the best in his division, and Dana could have certainly used his talents. Imagine the havoc Brendan could have caused in the UFC. He would have led the featherweight divisions to newer heights, and if he's won the PFL championship, there's no doubt that he could have won a UFC one as well. So Dana basically rejected a world champion based on what? Instincts? Yeah, huge mistake, just like not signing Fedor Emelianenko was. You all know how Fedor is widely known as one of the greatest heavyweight fighters in the history of MMA, right? And White couldn't even sign him. Yeah, maybe we're giving him too much crap for not being able to see talent in people like Brendan, because clearly Dana can't even do anything when it's all so obvious, and even he knows it. Emelianenko, also fittingly dubbed the Last Emperor, is probably the best fighter never to sign for the UFC, and a potential bout of his against Brock Lesnar used to be the talk of the MMA world. Everyone wanted it to happen so badly, and it would have earned the UFC a ton of profit. So, I'm sure Dana regrets not making that happen. And it's definitely regret here because it's not as if White didn't try. Oh no, he tried multiple times. There were several attempts to renegotiate a deal with Fedor, but none met the fighter's expectations. And sure, you can say that this isn't really on Dana then, considering it was really the Russian fighter who turned the contract down due to his reservations. But come on, this is Dana White we're talking about. That man can make anything happen. And if he really wanted to, he could have easily given Fedor a deal that worked for him and turned him into a legend. But he didn't want to compromise, as stubborn as he is, and so the dream fight between Lesnar and Fedor never saw the light of day. What a shame, really. Like, on the one hand, you're letting history-making moments like these slip by you, and on the other, you're giving contracts to people like CM Punk? Because what the heck was up with that? CM Punk was an MMA rookie, an unproven fighter who didn't even have an amateur record, and he was given a contract, while people like Brendan were turned away. White's decision to sign Punk was met with a lot of outrage from the MMA world. Fans and critics were very angry, and rightfully so. CM didn't deserve the privilege he was being handed so easily, especially not when there were other legitimate and more deserving fighters out there who've worked day and night for decades to just get a shot at the UFC. But Dana being Dana, he stubbornly stood by his decision and, of course, was forced to watch its horrible consequences unfold. Punk's UFC career was, in simple words, a complete mess. He obviously couldn't keep up with real MMA fighting. Now, White had signed him because he was a friend, but also because CM was popular. And the UFC probably thought that his fights would draw more viewers. Spoiler alert, that never happened. Punk's below-par performance led to an abrupt end to the deal, and that obviously meant that White regretted wasting his organization's resources on the guy. But that mistake still didn't stop him from giving Jose Aldo and Ronda Rousey automatic titles. Like, how does that even happen? Hear me out. I have nothing against Aldo or Rousey, and they're definitely not in the same league as Punk. They were definitely the best fighters in their divisions, and they proved that time and again. But you cannot be a UFC champion without ever having a UFC fight. That's never a good look. It makes zero sense and takes away all the credibility of a UFC title, no matter how good the fighters go on to be in the future. Now, White may not regret this as much, but it certainly brought the UFC's quality down for many fans. Next time, maybe have a contender fight before handing out belts? Although, in his defense, it's not like that always works in White's favor either. I'm talking about the whole Henry Cejudo saga. Everyone knows that the UFC has always had little interest in the smaller weight classes, including the flyweight one. While the flyweight division may host some of UFC's biggest names, like Demetrius Johnson, the organization really hasn't invested much in promoting it. That was until Henry Cejudo came about and won the title, of course. Dana thought, hey, now that's a face I want to promote. He thought that Cejudo had everything to catch interest, and why wouldn't he? Cejudo was an Olympic gold medalist, which earned him automatic points with the US fans. Plus, he was more than willing to adopt the bizarre image that sells in the MMA world, set to attract all the attention. And Henry didn't just want the flyweight title. He wanted to move up, bag the bantamweight title as well, and potentially become a double champion. And seeing as White was completely in love with the dude, he granted him the opportunity to compete there. Yeah, bad idea. You see, Cejudo managed to capture the belt, become a double champion, and then he retired. And what was White left with? Regret, demotivated fighters, and a division with no champion. But wait a minute, that sounds like a story we've heard recently as well. Didn't Francis Ngannou also leave the UFC heavyweight division as champion? Ngannou's exit from the UFC is perhaps the most talked about news in MMA in 2023. It left everyone shocked, but most of all, I'm sure it left White disappointed as heck, even if he won't admit to it. And that's not just because Francis left the heavyweight division empty or championless, like Henry's case. Of course, that is an issue, but the heavyweight division has fighters to make up for that, even if none of them are as good as the GOAT. The thing is, Francis could have been the answer to a lot of White's aspirations for the UFC. Dana has been talking about getting the UFC into Africa for quite some time now. The first time we heard of it was back at UFC 261. After which the boss confirmed that they'd be heading into Africa in 2022. That hasn't happened yet, but it could have easily if Ngannou were still around. You see, Francis is currently with the PFL, and he's declared the boss of PFL's African branch. It shows just how respected his name is in the African MMA world. And by disappointing him, the UFC has probably upset the entire market there, lowering their chances of advancing into the region even further. And I know what some of you are thinking. It was Francis who left. Dana didn't fire him or anything. You're right, but White also didn't do enough to keep him around. And honestly, Ngannou wasn't asking for a lot. He repeatedly said that he wasn't in it for the money, and he even turned down the UFC deal that'd apparently make him the richest heavyweight ever. What he really wanted was more freedom to fight outside the UFC, and he was particularly interested in boxing. A bout with Tyson Fury has been on the fighter's checklist for quite some time now, but White wouldn't let him have it. And with what he's lost because of it, I'm sure he regrets it a lot now. So, from not doing enough to keep Ngannou around, to rejecting Loughnane, who ended up becoming a world champion, these were the biggest mistakes of White's career.